Hello, and welcome to another episode of African American Voices of Charles County, presented by the Charles County NAACP. I'm your host, Joe Sampson Jr., and my guest today is Commissioner Reuben Collins, Esquire, who is the first African American to be elected as the president of the Charles County Commissioners. Commissioner Collins and I will converse about his history in the county, his decision to open the first African American law firm in Charles County, and then what it drives his passion for serving those who live and work in this community. So, Commissioner Collins, I first want to start by saying thank you for your willingness to participate in this interview series. I know you have quite an extensive history here in the county with the NAACP and all the work that you all and the commissioners are doing now just for the betterment of the county. But today, we kind of want to spend some time talking about you. Right. Who you are, and what got you to this point in life. So let's start with you. Born and raised. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay.
Southeast Washington.
Southeast.
Area called Parklands.
Okay.
Just off Alabama Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Early 60s, that's, really the time that my life started.
Yeah.
My family moved to Charles County when I was 5 years old.
Okay.
It's interesting, my father was a public school teacher, Charles County Public Schools.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Segregated Charles County Public Schools. He began his teaching career at Belle Alton High School.
Absolutely.
And when I think about that now, we were living in Southeast and he was commuting
to Belle Alton.
To Belle Alton. You just put that in perspective.
That's a hump.
It's a serious hump.
Yeah.
And so, needless to say, he started a family, and me, along with my two sisters, we moved to the Bryans Road area in 1965.
65. So that's an interesting time. It's an interesting time in D.C., obviously, especially Southeast and the history that has in that time. And then your dad coming down here, all the way down here, because back then, not that long ago, but I'm saying not that long ago in terms of this was considered the country, right? So like you were coming down to Belle Alton, which is way down, even further down.
It was way down.
That was way down there.
But what's interesting, and I didn't really appreciate it until I became an adult. There was really a thriving African American middle class that existed, and it was primarily teachers.
Yeah. Because
at that time, teaching was really one of the few areas that African Americans, could really build a middle class lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And it just so happened that area in Bryans Road around Pamunkey, a lot of public education teachers, African Americans, that were part of the segregated school system, kind of gravitated in that area. And so a lot of my earliest recollections were, just educators, that taught in Charles County Public Schools. Yeah. And I can actually remember as a very young child, actually seeing and hearing Mr. J.C. Parks.
Wow.
Who, as you know, schools are named after
Absolutely.
him. And during that time, or during his period, he was the superintendent of colored schools in Charles County. And so, just having those kind of recollections, it puts a lot of things in perspective for me.
So what schools did you attend here in Charles?
I started at J.C. Parks. First and second grade at J.C. Parks. And I take that back. First grade, totally segregated, because Charles County had not, at that time, fully abided by the Brown versus Board decision. And again, this is in the 60s.
It's in the 60s, absolutely.
Going into the second grade, and again, it's one of those images that don't leave your mind. The first day of school, all of the African American students were placed on one side of like the parking lot where the buses came in, and these white kids never seen before, they were on the other side, and then the teachers came up, depending on their classes,
Yeah.
and they started calling the teachers, and that was literally how they merged and desegregated Charles County Public Schools.
Wow.
They started mixing the
Literally
kids.
first
Literally,
days. Yeah, and I
I'm
understand.
6 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea what's happening.
Right.
But just recalling that stuff now, that was how Charles County desegregated public schools,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So J.C. Parks,
J.C. Parks.
which then puts you in an interesting place in the county, right? Because Pamunkey, the high school, is attached.
Right.
So it is literally right behind it. So you are your dad is teaching at Belle Alton. You're going to J.C. Parks. You then go to, where did you go from
Matthew
middle school?
Henson.
Matthew Henson.
And then, of course, I went to Lackey High School. And by the time I started school, I think my father had actually started working like at Milton Summers,
Okay.
at that time. So, but that's really part of, my early school history. Charles County had literally just begun desegregating public schools.
Yeah. So you're at Lackey, and what's interesting is you and I were fortunate enough in an unfortunate situation to present at an individual's funeral, Dr. Sanford Wilson. And during your remarks, you spoke to this specific time in your life, in high school, that time frame, where gentlemen like him had profound effects on who you were and what you were as a young African American in this county. What was it like at that time for you in like I said, Dr. Wilson's effect on you as a young man?
The only real role models for African Americans at that time were, for the most part, educators.
Yeah.
And so, and the church that I grew up in was Metropolitan United Methodist Church.
Absolutely.
Which was politically really one of the most activist churches in the entire county. It has a long history of being an activist church, and so it kind of opened the door for me to being exposed to, a certain level of leadership.
Yeah.
And I can say at that time, those were the things that began formulating in my mind, I think the direction, that I would go in the future.
Yeah.
I never really thought seriously about being a teacher, but but just the political side of things started building at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you matriculate through high school. You are, like I said, you're at, or like you said, Lackey is your high school. You graduate. You have to decide on whether, well, let me ask you this. What was the college conversation for you in your home? Your dad was an educator, so
Right.
I'm going to assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to make the assumption that there was a discussion that education doesn't stop right here.
Yeah, and even if it wasn't something that was definitively stated, it was certainly implied.
Absolutely.
And so I understood. I came from a family where HBCUs were extremely important. My mother went to North Carolina Central.
Okay.
I'm sorry, North Carolina A&T.
Okay.
My father graduated from Delaware State.
Nice.
So I knew on some level I would likely go to a HBCU. And so at the time when it was necessary for me to really begin looking at which school I would go to, I was really kind of convinced that Morgan State was the school that I would probably go to
Oh,
because
okay.
in Charles County, Morgan has a very strong history,
Very deep history. Absolutely.
and it's a tradition here. But my father kind of, he asked me, well, would you consider going to Fisk University? And Fisk is, in Nashville, Tennessee.
Absolutely.
That's the school where, my uncle, my father's brother, he graduated, and several members of my family, my father's side, they went to Fisk University. And so, I'm like 17 years old, and I'm like, what? Wow, that's like 500 miles away.
That's Tennessee, right?
This is
Right. It's
Tennessee.
Tennessee.
But for whatever reason, that seemed exciting to me.
Oh,
to
wow,
just
okay.
be away from home.
here, yeah.
I was like, that seemed like a great opportunity for
Yeah.
me. But one thing I wanted to, backtrack a little bit about high school,
Yes.
because there's a lot I really didn't appreciate even at that time, just in terms of how the county was transitioning. I ran for president of the student government my senior year, and I was actually elected. And I was the first, if either the first or second African American student government president at Lackey High School.
Really?
I want to make sure I'm correct with that, but I was either the first or second. And I remember during that period, there was a lot of dissension at Lackey High School. A lot of it was associated with, something as minor as what band would play at, our homecoming.
Yeah.
And it became like a kind of major issue, whether it be an African American band or, what had been traditionally, white bands that were playing at
Right.
homecoming.
Right.
And it kind of split in a lot of ways, where the school was, during that period. I think about that stuff now.
So let's stay right there for one moment. As the president of student government in high school, a few years into integration, and still having to deal with the differences on, like you said, which band would play, respecting all of the students to go. What did that feel like for you in that position, to be the president and attempt to be the voice for the young Black students in Lackey at that time?
I don't think I appreciated fully
Yeah.
the breadth of what was going on then, just in hindsight. I don't know if I had the maturity level to fully appreciate, the extent of what was going on, that it should have been something that was really prioritized. I just don't, I just don't think I saw it that way. And what I don't want to give the impression is that, there was just this total uproar
No,
because it wasn't like that, but it was a serious issue. And I think it could have turned in a lot of directions. Because there's undercurrents that existed. And I just in terms of my leadership, I don't think I fully appreciated what was going on at that time.
Right. I will note though that it does set off the apparent trend of seeking out leadership roles that affect a community, right? And so while you're in high school, the only community you really have at that point in time is your high school, right? And you can't run for the mayor of your block or anything like that. And so, and I also want to second what you're saying about the times. I grew up in Philadelphia, and in the 80s, I went to elementary school based on the desegregation program, right? And so if you being a few years older than me, it was a reality that we had to deal with, or that society was dealing with at that time. So I completely understand, and I understand what you're saying, that you want to make sure that you don't want to make it seem like that's what it was. However, that's what it was.
Right. No doubt.
Right, yeah.
No doubt.
So we're gonna pause right here. We're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll start to talk about what happened, how your time at Fisk, and then what brought you back to the area. Because Nashville is a long way away. And so to leave Nashville and decide to come back this trek, something had to tug you back. So we'll figure out what that is, all right?
All right.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
We're the NAACP. We don't follow movements, we define movements.
Welcome back. In our first segment, we briefly spoke about your history here in the county in terms of your educational journey through elementary, middle, and high school. We talked about what was interesting, the difference in first and second grade, and just remembering that you were there on day one when J.C. Parks was integrated, and how, you know, as we were talking off camera, I was appreciative of you in that story, because a lot of times we hear the stories of African Americans when it's time to desegregate, how we went to the predominantly white schools, or the white schools at that time, to integrate, but we don't really hear a lot of stories of when the white students came to the African American schools, because it was the thought process was it was integration because that was better for us. And so to know that, obviously being in the second grade, you don't understand what's going on, but something lodged that in your memory to realize something different happened here, that one side was there. You talked about your running for and being elected the president of SGA and Lackey. And so we finished up that first segment talking about that trek out to Fisk in Nashville, Tennessee. How was that? How was your time at Fisk?
I can say that that 4-year period was arguably the most rewarding of my entire life. I can say that in that 4 years, I grew from being, a young man that really didn't have a clear understanding of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to accomplish, to becoming more appreciative of my heritage and culture, because just that experience, the HBCU experience in general, will provide you with that type of education. But Fisk in particular, because of its history, I can only say, just looking back now, that I didn't fully take advantage of the type of resources that existed there, just in terms of historical documents that were actual documents from W.E.B. Du Bois. These things were right in my midst, and I'm out here clowning and carrying on, getting into, the whole fraternity life, and not really fully recognizing, that side of that experience. But I mean, in a nutshell, that was the most rewarding experience of my entire life.
So I want to ask, because along with the experience of an HBCU, you mentioned the fraternity life and what the Divine Nine means to the HBCU experience, what it means to African Americans overall during college and afterwards. Speak to how either you chose it or it chose you, the fraternity that you are a part of.
I would say it chose me to an extent, because going into college, I mean, it was pretty clear that if I was going to pledge, it would be as an Omega, because my father was an Omega. His brother which was my namesake, that graduated from Fisk University, was an Omega. You know, the Ada Psi chapter. I mean, so everything was in place for me to kind of continue that tradition. But when the people that were my closest friends, were more aligned with Kappa Alpha Psi, and so I think it was not so much me just saying, okay, I'm choosing. It was like really just the people I was affiliated with, the people that I got close with, and that that's how I kind of went in that direction.
Yeah. So you're done at Fisk. You graduate. What was your major?
Political science.
Political science. Okay. So that's interesting because I remember that there was a time in life where anyone who wanted to be a lawyer, they were steered towards political science as their major. Is that why you selected political science, or?
Yeah, that was, and I'm gonna tell you, Joe, it wasn't necessarily like my mind was so clear, like I knew what I was gonna do. I mean, I know a lot of that was being influenced by, my parents, and and this was kind of the direction, because I can't say I had this biting, clear understanding of what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But it was like during the course of time in college that I started gathering a better understanding of, okay, what does a lawyer actually entail? Because I mean, there weren't no role models like that here. There were no African-American attorneys that were practicing in the county that that I could kind of say, okay, this is somebody I'd like to, emulate.
Yeah.
It just wasn't like that. But being around, some of my frat brothers and other classmates, I started gaining a better understanding of, okay, the law might be, a potential option for me. Yeah.
Wow. So that's interesting because we filmed an episode with Judge West, and my daughter, who in middle school had a desire, she was in high school, early years of high school, had a desire to become a lawyer. And it's interesting that you're saying that in your time that didn't exist in the county. The person to look at to be that. You mentioned earlier that the majority of the black middle class here was propped up behind education. And so in terms of where this county has come, how far it's come in terms of individuals like yourself who are back here to provide that other view of what other professions look like. My daughter was able, through attorney Makiba Gibbs, she shadowed her for a week, and then she shadowed Judge West for a week, for a couple of days in his chambers and on the bench, so she could see what that looks like. And so to see how the individuals like yourself, because we're going to talk about what you did in terms of opening a law practice here, to give young African Americans something to set their sights on, to say, all right, we know that there are black lawyers because that guy whose son I play soccer with today has a law firm. So you come back from Fisk. What brings you back to D.C.? To the D.C. area, should I say?
I mean, nothing other than, I guess I'm just going back home, looking at a possible job maybe with the federal government. I'm just being honest, man. It's not like I had this vision.
And that's okay.
Like I fully understood what I was trying to do, because I honestly I didn't.
So I think it's really, really, really important for that to be heard, right? Because there's this misconception that a person who wanted to be a lawyer wanted to be a lawyer from day one, right? Like some people did, but other people didn't. I joined the Air Force because, like you, I didn't have an idea of what I wanted to do when I graduated high school, when I got out of high school, and so I needed another option. One was given to me by my mom, which was the Air Force,
Right.
because I didn't, the rising cost of college at the time, I didn't want to spend that money, or in my mind, waste my parents' money. So you're back in D.C., you're back here. What led you to law school? Because at some point you decided, I'm gonna try this?
I mean, I made a choice because I recognized that the law was a really strong option for me. I was also kind of gearing my thinking more towards possibly getting a master's in social work, you know, because I'd started doing a lot of research on that type of program, you know, that Howard University provided.
Yeah.
Because my thinking was, you know, in that particular period when I was about to go to law school, I call that my enlightening period.
Yeah.
Because I just really started reading, and it was mostly, you know, like books from Ivan Van Sertima, you know, Tony Browder, you know, Egyptology. I mean, I was really, really into that particular period of time, you know, where, you know, there was more of a focus on truly understanding our identity as African people. And I've always kind of reflected on that period because what was going on nationally was one of the most conservative periods in the entire nation, because that's Reaganism and all this was happening. Yep. And it seemed like the reaction of black people, you know, we really began to fully appreciate who we were.
Yeah.
And so, you know, just my reading at the time, it really started developing to the point where, you know, I was really considering possibly being, you know, a teacher, you know, on the college level, something like that. And so it was a matter of just deciding, do I really want that, or do I really want to kind of pursue the law? Because I've also, even though it wasn't direct, you know, I also began to really fully appreciate what the law could do just in terms of being an igniter of social change. And so that's when I really started pursuing the law.
Okay.
And that's how I inevitably started by taking the you know, the law school entry exam. You know, really kind of getting feelers. I was that was the point in my life where I really felt like I was like aggressively trying to reach out to see what I could do, you know, to take that next step, you know, in terms of my development, you know.
How did you decide on, because you went to UDC for law school, right? How did you decide on UDC rather than, say, Howard?
Actually, Howard was my first choice, and but I had a better opportunity to actually get accepted to the District of Columbia. It was called the D.C. School of Law.
Oh, okay.
And it was formerly Antioch Law School. But what it provided was an opportunity to really prepare you as a lawyer for directly practicing right out of law school.
Okay.
And the school is well known for its clinical program. So it spent and it provided for its students, you know, an opportunity to really prepare you for the actual practice of law.
Yeah.
And the school is well known as being very progressive, just in terms of, you know, being an activist school. It wasn't your traditional law school. You know, it was one that was really aggressive in preparing its students to be future leaders, you know, and to be future activists.
So I find it interesting that you said UDC was one of the law schools that prepared you to come right out and practice. Obviously, you took the bar after that. Obviously, you passed the bar. Did that play into you deciding where you were going to start or did you decide to start a practice then? Or were you planning on going to...
No, I did. Because, I mean, and that was another dynamic that I saw immediately. And it became clear to me during my second year of law school, because that's when law students begin, you know, their whole process of interviewing with, you know, large firms in the city. And it became clear to me that just wasn't going to work for me.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily because I didn't want it. I know I didn't have the credentials. You know, I wasn't coming from, you know, like Harvard Law School. You know, with my grades, I wasn't straight A.
Right.
So, you know, just that process, it wasn't going to work for me.
Yeah.
So I recognized, you know, I had to be in hustle mode. And so I had to fully prepare to actually get out and practice. And so that was my mindset, you know, just going into the completion of law school and graduating. You know, they literally to start my own firm, you know, and then just hit the ground running, you know, with my practice, you know.
And Charles County, why'd you choose Charles County?
I first started practicing in the district. That's
Okay.
why I was first licensed in the district. So I practiced, you know, about 7.5 years.
Okay.
In the district, and then I got licensed in Maryland. And originally, my license was in New Jersey, so I'm licensed in New Jersey,
Okay.
the District of Columbia, and the state of Maryland. But I started my actual practice in the district.
And then you decided to
And then
move
I decided, because that was a plan all along. I wanted to, you know, develop a practice here. I wanted to really be a part of, you know, developing, you know, what would eventually be a, you know, minority firm in Charles County.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You know, when I was doing a little research, background wise, when I read that, I thought of it, and I thought of how long African Americans have lived in Charles County, and obviously being second vice of the NAACP, I hear all of these stories of the need for lawyers at different times throughout the history of the county, and it was wild that you and your partner at the I'm not sure how the firm started, but we'll discuss that in a little bit. How you all opened the first African American law firm here, and that's a really big deal, because there's a need to be represented sometimes by individuals who look like you and understand you based on whatever you are fighting in whatever case. And at the end of the day, being such a close-knit community, having someone that knows you or is a part of that community to represent you can always feel comforting, because dealing with the law on the other side is usually not an easy one. So the comfort of your lawyer is always something that people lean towards. So did you once you opened it here, did you feel that immediately?
No, I can say absolutely, and I kind of, because listening to you describe that, that's one of the things that I appreciate about, you know, our people, people that have known you, you know, from, you know, childhood on up, especially many of the elders.
Yeah.
Because, you know, for many of our elders, you know, just being a lawyer, I mean, it's something that's they're very proud of you. You know, I just recall so many of the elders calling me Lawyer Collins, you know, and I mean, and it just out of respect, you know, and many asking me to do wills, and, you know, I think of those things just in terms of recognizing that there was an appreciation, and that people did see the fact that, you know, I continued the education, I became a lawyer, that was something that people were very proud of.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of the law firm itself, Judge Talley and I, you know, had known each other for maybe a year or so.
Okay.
And our relationship began literally with us both being members of the Charles County Bar Association. And it was one of these situations, because we laugh about this now, you know, we would literally like be the only brothers in the room, and we would just be looking like, whoa, what's up? You know, and that's how we kind of began, you know, conversations. And he had been building a really solid career as a defense attorney, excellent defense attorney. And I was really starting developing a practice more on the civil side. And so, we really just started our conversations about the possibilities.
Yeah.
And things clicked, and we were able to put together the first African-American firm, and I'm pretty certain in the Southern Maryland region, not just Charles County.
Wow. Wonderful. Okay, so that's a great place to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about law, your relationship in terms of being general counsel with the NAACP down here, and the work you've done for I'll say us in terms of the NAACP, and then what led to the political aspirations. All right, so in a moment we'll come back to that. Stay tuned.
When we adopt a shelter pet, we discover they're a unique mix of all kinds of things.
Come on, Jules, spot on this last one. There it is. Keep going with it. Leo.
They're a little bit of a lot of things, but they're all pure love.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we got to the nitty-gritty about how you got into law, the huge accomplishment of starting the first African-American law firm here in Charles County, and what led to those things. We talked about your time at Fisk, how you gravitated towards and were pulled simultaneously towards being a Kappa. But in this last segment, what I want to focus on, what I want to start with and then transition into is your legal relationship with the NAACP. At some point, your firm was the general counsel for the NAACP. Can you talk to me about that time, that early time? There are some giants that I've heard about that I've never been able to. Obviously, they're no longer here. In the civil rights era, that fought a lot for African Americans in Charles County. That you, based on time frame, if I marry them up together, you would have come across those individuals. So talk to me briefly about that relationship between your firm, general counsel, and Charles County NAACP.
Well, it started with Salome Howard.
Yeah.
She, and my first exposure to the branch was an annual summer event that she held. I think she called it a jamboree. Mm-hmm. And it was unique in Charles County at that time because it connected African-American students from across the county. So it was one of those rare events where, it was kids from, Lackey, La Plata, mm-hmm. Thomas Stone, because then we only had like 3 high schools. But they converged, at, her home. I mean, it was like a big deal. I mean, it was a major event.
It was at her house.
It was at her house.
Wow.
Okay. And it was like jam packed. It was just this outstanding event. That was my introduction to Miss Howard. My father, is a lifetime member of the NAACP, and he was early on he was involved in the branch. But as I got older, I started, my, actual relationship as a member of the branch. And once I graduated from law school, that's when I took on the position of being general counsel for the branch. At that time, when I started, Swanese Hawkins was president of the branch. And most of my time directly acting as counsel was with Wanda Woodland mm-hmm. at the helm, which was a very progressive period. I think of, several issues that we directly addressed. One was there was a a fight about the naming of the eventual. I think it was. I forgot which high school it was. It might even been. I can't. Was it West? It was Westlake, because originally the school was going to be named after a Confederate war veteran, and at that time, Edith Patterson sat on the Board of Education, and she spoke out at that time, and then the branch really became a part of that fight, and I recall that vividly. I don't know if you recall, but there was a time when all of those entry signs into the county. There was one in Indian Head. I mean, not Indian. Entry from into Waldorf, and in the town of La Plata, that had the emblems of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans on them.
Sign.
Right, and these are signs saying "Welcome to Charles County," and so this is what people are seeing.
And we're
so
talking, this is the 90s.
Right, this is the 90s.
This is the 90s. Okay.
This is the 90s, and so the branch, was strongly opposed to, and those signs eventually got rid of those emblems. But the thing I think most about during my period working with the branch was working directly with the ACLU to look at whether Charles County was in violation of the Voting Rights Act, because all elections in Charles County for state office as well as our county commissioners is at large, and so there was a lot of case law at that time, really challenging at large voting. But the determination from the ACLU at that time was Charles County, because we didn't really have contiguous African American communities that you could say this would be a voting block of African American voters that you could say are not being allowed to actually vote as a voting block. But historically, and as we proceeded, the county's demographics kind of took care of that issue by itself.
Absolutely.
But that was a very rewarding period, just working directly with the branch.
So somewhere in there, there became some political aspirations. Currently, as I spoke early on, that you're currently the president, the first African American president of the Charles County Commissioners. But at some point, this is your second time around. Right. So the first time around, you were a commissioner. Not that that's. And so, what led to that decision? Where did you decide? You know what? I want to toss my hat into the political arena. And did you maintain both? Did you still maintain your practice while you were a commissioner? How did that work?
I would say yes. That transition to politics, I would say, really started around 1988, and at that time I was I had the great privilege of working with a gentleman that many people in Charles County don't even recall, and I would argue was one of the most important political figures in the county's history, recent history. His name was Claude Mathis. Claude Mathis, he was a member of the branch, but he also started what was called at that time the Charles County Rainbow Commission or Committee, which was an extension of Jesse Jackson's Rainbow. And it was at that time when Jesse ran for president. That political body, under his leadership, it was very vocal in the county, and working directly with him, I learned so much about the political process. One of the things that he did that, again, I don't think people appreciate is he was the one that proposed, creating voting districts for the Board of Commissioners. Because prior to that time, you just ran no matter where you were in the county, and whoever the top voters, that would be the Board of Commissioners. But it was his proposal to create voting districts. Originally, the idea was to actually, literally, have the voting where it was not at large, because the thinking then was it would make it easier for African Americans, for the most part in Waldorf, where you were starting to see a build of African American voters, so that it would open the door to the possibility of electing, a commissioner representing Waldorf. But the proposal, as a compromise, it was still at large. But he was instrumental in really getting me interested in politics. He died, unfortunately, in 1988, just before the presidential election. But, I definitely wanted to take some time to kind of, introduce those that are unfamiliar with his name. Absolutely. But he was a tremendous political figure. But he influenced me. And it was as a result of that work with the NAACP and recognizing the importance of us appreciating how important, being at the table, and that's really a reflection of Salome Howard, someone that always talked about being at the table. Those are the things that were influencing me, and that's why I wanted to run, because I wanted to be a part of seeing our county change and become, a community that appreciates the interests of all of our citizens.
Yeah. So I found something that was really interesting the first time around. You started a lot of and as a father, obviously, I noticed that there were a lot of programs that you focused on for young people in the county during your first stint with the commissioners. What was the driving force in that? What fueled the need to make sure that the young folks in Charles County needed or had programs, and what was happening that led that to fuel that led you towards that?
The county was a lot different, and I'm saying that as if that was 70 years ago,
Yeah,
but
it
wasn't. I mean, you're talking really like 20, 25 years, but the county was totally different, just in terms of having a political muscle to move forward on a lot of activities. I started a nonprofit organization in 1989 that's called the Black Leadership Council for Excellence, and that's where I really began my focus on youth programs in the county. I mean, during the course of time of the operation of the organization, we gave over $20,000 in scholarships to black children in Charles County Public Schools. Yeah. And so once I was in elected office, it was a no-brainer for me to establish programs that would be geared towards young people. And the thing out of all the programs that I'm most proud of is starting a summer youth employment program in the county.
That's the one I found, absolutely.
And that's something that, the previous Board of Commissioners, they stopped funding it, but that was one of the first things that we brought back on the table. And I anticipate that this board will actually expand the scope of that program, because it is something that it prepares our young people for future employment, and it provides a venue for them to do things during the course of the summer, things that are positive. Yeah. And they're making money. Yeah. So yeah.
Never going to argue that.
Right.
So let me ask one final question, because obviously there was a break in your first stint as a commissioner, and now as the president of the commission. Explain to me, if you can, the difference. What's the difference in the position? The commissioners hold a specific set of power for the purse of the county. But talk to me about the significance of an African American in the position of the president of the county commissioners.
Our form of government, the commissioner form of government, is actually operated by a board of commissioners. all 5 commissioners, including the president, equally share 1 vote. So you need a majority of that 5 to move forward on any initiatives, any policy that impacts the citizens of Charles County. The difference between being a commissioner representing Waldorf, District 3 as I was, to being president is that I'm actually able to set the agenda, and as a result of that, from the very beginning, we've made it very clear what our priorities are, and they're based on things that have been important to me through the years, including like the Summer Youth Employment Program, youth services. But economic development has been at the absolute top of our agenda. One of the things that I want our citizens to recognize is, the county started an MBE program in 2005, but it's primarily a voluntary MBE program. During the course of the 2020 budget that we just passed, the county allocated funding for an actual disparity study. And this is an important piece to really putting teeth into an MBE program, because it creates, through that study, it gives you the legal strength to uphold an MBE program, so it won't be challenged, because going through that study, you can show that contractors who have attempted to do business with the county in the past, have not really been given a full shake, as a result of, implied racism and just difficulties in moving through the process. So the study will give that MBE program teeth, and that's going to create tremendous opportunities for, African American contractors, and not just African Americans, minority contractors, veterans, women, and it's going to help to boost our overall economy. And so that focal point, is really at the center of what the agenda is, because at the end of the day, if by building our overall economy, we'll be able to provide for public education, for public safety, and all of, the amenities that our citizens are seeking. And so it's very important. And the other thing I wanted to add before we close is we've established a sister city relationship with the southeastern country of Mozambique, southeastern African country of Mozambique. And this is going to provide opportunities, and I'm looking forward to telling our citizens more about potential opportunities, being trade partners with Mozambique. We are doing preliminary conversations with the country of Ghana as well. So we're trying to build our overall economy and make it an international economy to provide opportunities for our citizens.
Wow, that's fantastic. Wow. Nice. So as we bring this conversation to a close, I definitely want to thank Commissioner Collins again for your willingness to participate in this interview series and to share your journey with the viewers. As usual, I want to thank Justin, Amber, and Mike for all your hard work behind the scenes. This program goes nowhere without your work, and I'm appreciative of that. Remember to follow the Charles County NAACP on all social media platforms for information on how you can join the branch or partner with us in making a difference in our community. I appreciate you, the viewer, for spending a little time with us, and I'll see you next time on another episode of African American Voices of Charles County. Thank you.